We're so excited for you to join us today and share what's happening with the Mastery Transcript. You're on the ground, kind of the first ones to really interact with the transcript and use this as a test for seeing how your students are reflected in the Mastery Transcripts.
I'm from Tulsa. I am employed by Holland Hall, and Holland Hall trusted us to launch this program called Tulsa Term. And Tulsa Term is a semester program. It's like a school that happens between Holland Hall students and Tulsa Public School students. And intentionally, we wanted it to be 6 and 6 to start off with 12 students and see what happens when you try and do deep learning with students and get them to see that the real world is now. And so that's sort of the premise of what we do and why we do what we do. And I think an opportunity and an excitement has been to the dream of getting students to be engaged with place and where they're from, and to see how academic skills plus habits of mind can come together to help them to think innovatively and to see themselves in the story of where they live and to make a difference in that place.
So our goal through project-based learning and interdisciplinary seminars is to really create equity for all kids and trying to develop student agency and developing more awareness of what our world needs, what our community needs through real-world problems to solve. So that journey fits perfectly with Mastery Transcript.
So over the last 5 years, we've partnered with external clients ranging from Delta Airlines to Porsche North America to the Center for Civil and Human Rights to do work that matters outside of the context of school. So the opportunity there is that there's this really incredible moment when you put students on a real world challenge in a real world context where the learning becomes so much more important than what we all have defined for them over the last century of doing school this way, to putting them at the center of it and giving them this radical agency to take ownership over what it is they learn and how they learn it, and then to apply it in a context that's bigger than themselves.
We've been using an LMS that already tracks things as competencies. So we're seminar-based, interdisciplinary, so students don't take courses, they take a seminar that's theme-based. So right now I'm teaching a seminar on gardening. So it's art and design and a lot of science. So our system was already starting to be built out that we could take these different standards or competencies and put them together. And the vision was to have no grades.
I think for us, the entire idea behind Mastery Transcript, we came to it really authentically. So when we started to change the type of work that we asked our students to do, it fundamentally changed the way that we reported out on it and assessed student growth. Just yesterday, I had a group of 8 students who presented to the global lead for innovation at Delta. In that moment, there's no letter or number that can actually line up to how well they did yesterday. That type of feedback came from them saying, like, we're gonna test this idea. And we have been struggling over the last 4 years of, like, how do you capture moments like that in a way that over time shows growth year to year? So some of those students were sophomores. I've got them for 2 more years. So for them to have that there, what does it look like when they are seniors? And we think that mastery-based learning, the idea of competencies, really is going to allow us to set the bar higher than what's been traditionally accepted for someone their age.
So I'm thinking of 2 students, just to give an example. And one student is a high flyer, like perfect scores on standardized tests kind of student. But I think she learned more about herself by having to go through thinking about skills and competencies, habits of mind, than she's ever had to before. And then another student who was kind of able to say, oh, I see what I'm missing, or I see what I'm doing well, and had never just had a chance to go meta like that on their story. But also, being designers of experience, it means that we are so much more intentional, I think, about what we're designing, because there's a dialogue happening between the end and the beginning all the time.
For me, I think for students, the game changer will be that they'll own it. You know, I think a transcript before was just this thing that happened, because you went to school and it was just there, versus I have to think about my story. How am I telling my story? And my background is I'm an art teacher, so that's really natural to me because if you're preparing kids for art school, that's all you're doing.
Right.
You're preparing a portfolio and you're telling your story and you're showing your thinking skills. And it always surprised me that that wasn't something you did in any other area. It's a journey. So if you're thinking growth mindset, it's okay to be, we're using the word in progress, until you get to proficient, which for us is like you can do it but with support. And then mastery would be we feel comfortable that you could do it on your own without us. So I think building that language for both parents, students, staff is a game changer.
We've tried to launch portfolios multiple times to varying degrees of success, whether they're online, however we're cataloging our students' growth. There's so much overlap in what the platform is functioning like now that I think it's actually going to add that for us in a way that's like this portfolio. We actually now have a way to deliver it to colleges. Sure. So right now it's the students see it as like this is an extra thing that no one's ever going to see. So why am I putting in the effort to thoughtfully catalog the work that I've done? Where I think that they'll actually start to look at it as they won't see it as a transcript so much, but they'll see it more as a body of work, more as that portfolio. And I think that that's a really interesting bridge to play with for the students to have more ownership over it.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, that's what I'm most excited about too. I talked earlier about the students who maybe want to go right into a career or go into a trade school, and I think the transcript will allow me to push those kids, because I think in a traditional environment, if someone's already written off the idea of four-year college or I'm just going to tech school, they think they can just do the bare minimum. But I think we can flip that idea of But what are you doing with this? If you want to be that career, what can you show within this platform that's going to make you successful?
I love that question because it is a hard question, and it's one we are living right now. I would say, did we get kids to opt in, or did they choose to opt in? Yes. Can they talk about how they've grown? Yes. Is all the work done on time that we've asked them to do when we ask them to do it? No. I think it's a confusing dance sometimes of when you do need to just have that carrot and when you need to have that stick. Because one of our habits of mind is resilience. Another is striving for accuracy, which means like being thorough in your approach. And with our most recent capstone unit, which they will be presenting next week, we just said, these are going to be the habits of mind we need you to focus on. You will be ready, and we're gonna make sure so we were a bit like controlling or demanding or directive because we were able to read that some of our students really, it's just they're just not there yet when it comes to that, and the executive function needed to do all the pieces that are needed to do project work. So I don't even know if I've even begun to answer the question, but except to acknowledge that for us it has been a dance between how do we tap into what we know they do well, and then use that to help bridge how they can achieve a completed high-quality product, and then also how to do that in community so that they don't feel like they're on their own trying to achieve something.
I think when you're talking about intrinsic motivation, like we beat that out of kids like in preschool, right? Like we give you a sticker and a reward and a piece of candy, and so I think it's hard to all of a sudden say, oh, because I've given you a project-based environment or I've given you choice or agency that you're all of a sudden going to be intrinsically motivated. So I think it's really an engine, right? Like you're building this big machine that's taking these small steps and then wrapping them in so they do have those habits of mind.
We often say that like the adolescent brain is the best part of what we do. It also makes this incredibly difficult. Because even with the work that I get to do with our students has direct relevancy outside of the classroom. You would think that the day before Delta shows up, that they would be like, we've got it all under control. They didn't. Like, they were still very much like the morning of, like, going back to the drawing board and changing the flow. So that it is that delicate balance of, like, what is directive from me or from our teaching team, and what is putting the student out there to fall on their face. I actually had a student at the end of the presentation yesterday, she looked at me and she's like, I really thought this was going to be the time we were going to fail. but we didn't. Like, we pulled it off some way. And she's like, at some point, this isn't gonna, like, the way that we do our work is going to stop us, and we aren't gonna be able to pull it off at the end. And I think it's moments like that's why I teach. Like, that's a beautiful moment. But I think it's moments like that that really get at agency, because in that moment, she owned that they hadn't been productive. They weren't getting to that end, but she also was like, but we nailed it, and they like loved what we did, but that's not a sustainable model going forward.
Right.
So.
And that's what I was going to say, that even if they had failed, like, that's the best learning, because now
Yeah.
they can reflect on what they did, and you can have the conversation. And I think that's the thing that's missing in school often, is instead it's, I've scored you or I've given you that feedback, but there's no loop to bring that back, and the mastery model develops that.
Well, and even in that, like, she said this with like a smile on her face. Like, she was laughing about the opportunity to fail,
Right.
Which shows that the culture is totally different. Like,
That's right.
she was totally accepting of like, failure could happen, and it wouldn't have been the worst thing. We would have grown from it, and probably grown more from that failure than what we just did.
I had a lot of students like that being in an art school. We attracted kids who were creatively minded, often categorized with, labels like ADD, ADHD, and sometimes that did develop a skill gap for them throughout their K-8 experience. And they would come to us, and because we were in a competency-based environment and focused more on these life skills, we could see that those same kids were the best teachers. They were usually the leaders, like the team leaders that would evolve because they became the creative director in a project. And they just grew in all these ways that schools don't typically assess and quantify. So I think that's what gave our students the self-esteem they needed, where in the same building, when I was teaching just art, those would have been the kids that came to me and in my art class would have done well, and then every other teacher in the building complained about them. And then I'd be like, really? Like that kid? Like, oh, he's so great in my art class.
You know those students who are just good old solid B students? And sometimes you don't know what grade to give them, right?
Yeah.
Because they're fine, you know.
Right.
But part of the reason that a mastery transcript competency-based assessment or evaluation or portfolio or whatever it ends up being would be great for those kids is part of the reason that they are doing so well is they are, doing there, but not like the AAA kid. It's because they are doing so many things out in the world or in different domains in their school. They don't have time to just grind down on one thing. And so this would allow them to say, here is what I give, here's who I am to the school, or et cetera. A lot of these students are also the glue to communities. Like they are the ones who, because of their presence, there is a community, and that can be articulated in a better way than they did great in this English project. But they still got a B. What are we saying? What are we actually codifying? So I think about that group.
Well, one of my sophomores just found out that she is no longer allowed to play athletics because she's had too many concussions. School doesn't traditionally fit her, so she's in this moment of transition right now where for most of her academic career, people have been like, soccer's your way to like differentiate yourself. So she is trying to find like what that is for her. But in the past year alone, she's written a children's story about finding your own voice in response to the current political culture of today. She was part of that Delta presentation and presented about a boarding process that she had developed herself. And even in like the last 6 or so weeks, she's grown so much in response to her thing being taken away from her in a lot of ways. So I see the mastery transcript really highlighting a student like that, even though that's a very specific case. High schoolers need different ways to show different skill sets and different mindsets that connect more broadly than we currently let them.